Welcome to Tamworth, a fascinating Staffordshire town filled with history. Once upon a time, Tamworth here was the capital of the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Mercia, and today the town holds plenty more riveting points of interest, from the mighty medieval church of St Editha to the elegant grounds of the Castle Gardens, so named for the grand Norman castle which still stands in the heart of town more than 900 years after it was first built. And as we take a walk around the centre of Tamworth, we'll also hear some fascinating stories of famous figures associated with the town, a 300-year-old grudge that endures to this day, and the tale of how Tamworth was for much of history actually split right down the middle between two separate counties, the border running right through the town's main streets. All of that is to come over the next 25 minutes or so, but we begin our walk looking towards Tamworth's most iconic landmark of all, the castle, which in its current form is more than 900 years old, having been built back in the late 11th century. As historic as that may sound, the story of Tamworth Castle here actually goes back even further. In fact, the current fortress, which was built by the Normans, is generally believed to stand on the site of what was once an Anglo-Saxon palace, built as long ago as the year 781 AD, more than 1200 years ago. For almost all that time, the castle was fiercely defended, but today its grounds are open to the public, and we too can venture inside through this fetching crenellated gatehouse, known as the Holloway Lodge, which was actually only built just over 200 years ago in 1810, and as such is the most recent addition to Tamworth's grand fortress. But let's wind the clock back to the very beginning of the castle's history, which, as we mentioned, began more than 1200 years ago in the Anglo-Saxon era. And just here at the foot of the castle mound, there stands a statue of one of the great leaders of that age, Aethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians. The daughter of King Alfred the Great, Aethelflaed is often thought of as England's forgotten queen, but she played a major role in the birth of the nation that we know today. For 7 years in the early 10th century, she ruled the Kingdom of Mercia, which covered much of central and southern England, alone. And she made great strides in improving the defences of major towns, including Tamworth here, while also leading the fight back against the Vikings, occupying much of northern England, successfully capturing the cities of Derby and Leicester from Danish control, and ultimately winning the loyalty of the Vikings in York, a major development in early English history. But through all of these triumphs, Aethelflaed is closely associated with Tamworth Castle because it was here that she spent much of her reign. And it was also here that she raised her young nephew, a boy by the name of Aethelstan, who would later go on to become the very first king of all England. It's fair to say then that Tamworth is one of the many towns which can claim to have stood at the epicentre of a nation's birth. But the palace in which Aethelflaed and Aethelstan once resided is now long gone, replaced by a more modern Norman castle that we'll get a closer look at in a couple of minutes. However, as we head further into Tamworth's delightful castle gardens, let's take a brief moment to consider where exactly this town is located. And as we can see from this map, Tamworth lies in the west of England's Midlands, just under 15 miles to the north of the major city of Birmingham. Today, the town lies in the southeastern corner of the county of Staffordshire, but you might be surprised to hear that once upon a time, Tamworth was once split right down the middle between two separate counties. The point where we started our walk, outside the castle grounds, has always been in Staffordshire, but this area of town, where the River Anker flows past these now pristine public gardens, was for much of history inside the neighbouring county of Warwickshire. As we make our way around the town centre, we'll be passing back and forth across the old county border numerous times. But in 1889, to ease local government as the town's population was growing on the back of industrial development, the decision was taken to place the whole town of Tamworth inside just one county, Staffordshire, as it remains today. That also meant that Tamworth Castle found itself within the bounds of a new county for the first time in more than 1,000 years. But this was a relatively trivial development within the scope of the fortress's long past. As we mentioned, Tamworth Castle began life as an Anglo-Saxon palace, the main seat of power in the Kingdom of Mercia. But in the late 11th century, England was invaded by the Norman armies of William the Conqueror, who, after his victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, set about a programme of building new castles all over the country, in order to cement his grip on nationwide power. Tamworth Castle here was one of those castles, originally built of timber back in the year 1086, but soon after redeveloped as a stronger stone castle in the late 12th century. Much of the castle that we see today is a product of that time period, and there are few features more distinctive than the castle motte here, a large man-made mound of earth atop which the keep, the central part of the fortress, stands high, overlooking the town and the surrounding countryside. Nowadays, the castle keep is open to visitors, though as we can see today it's undergoing some refurbishment, with the flag that you see on the scaffolding there depicting St Alban's Cross, a historic banner of the Kingdom of Mercia, and not the Scottish Saltire, as it can understandably be mistaken for. Now, for defensive reasons, the castle keep here was designed to be difficult to access. But in the 12th century, this stone path, known as a causeway, was built to ease the passage between the central part of the castle, atop the motte, and the rest of the fortress's grounds, an area also known as the bailey. This motte and bailey layout is a famous feature of Norman-era castles all over England. And while the motte hosted the lords who were resident at the castle, the bailey here was a hive of activity, once busy with kitchens, stables and more facilities, all designed to serve the noble household. The main point of this was to create a self-sufficient castle, where the lords could live comfortably, even in the face of hostile forces outside the castle. But to be doubly sure, the bailey was surrounded by huge walls and gates that separated the castle here from the rest of Tamworth. And just here, we can see exactly what one of those gates would have looked like. This illustration shows the original appearance of a 13th century gatehouse, which was built on a fearsome scale, and it once stood right here. Although, as we can see, only its stone foundations remain today, inside what was once the main castle ditch. Indeed, while Tamworth Castle may have been a centre of power for the Anglo-Saxons, and a key strategic centre for the Normans, over the centuries it seems to have lost its significance. By the turn of the 16th century, the bailey here had become largely derelict, and it wasn't until the 19th century that it was remodelled as the gardens that we know today. We'll return to the castle gardens at the end of our walk, but for now it's time for us to make our way out of the grounds of Tamworth's famous old fortress, and into the streets of the town centre. Immediately we're greeted by the sight of the Town Hall, a majestic landmark that was built more than 300 years ago in 1701, and which served both as a venue for council meeting chambers, and on the ground floor, Tamworth's historic street markets. Fittingly then, the Town Hall stands in the heart of Market Street, the venue for local markets ever since the Anglo-Saxon era. Today, meanwhile, in front of the Town Hall, there stands a prominent statue of a man named Robert Peel, who back in the early 19th century was the Member of Parliament for Tamworth, while also serving in a position as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Originally from Lancashire, Peel was Prime Minister for a total of 5 years over 2 separate terms, and is today especially remembered as one of the founding members of Britain's Conservative Party. In fact, the modern party has often been said to be based on principles that were laid out by Robert Peel in 1834 in this very town. The so-called Tamworth Manifesto, a pitch to the townspeople during his election campaign that year. Arguably the most influential MP to serve Tamworth, Peel wasn't the only notable figure to represent the town. Indeed, the town hall here was built with donations from a man known as Tamworth's incomparable benefactor, the local MP, Thomas Guy, who also contributed to the construction of almshouses for the poor and new facilities for the town's grammar school. Guy's reputation, however, took a hit when he was voted out as the local MP in 1707. He saw this as pure ingratitude for all his generosity towards the town of Tamworth, and he even threatened to demolish the town hall and ban locals from using his almshouses. In the end, though, the town hall remained standing, and Guy moved to London, rejecting this town for the rest of his life. There are more stories to be told about Tamworth's captivating town hall, and we'll return to Market Street here a little later on in our walk. But now we're going to make our way through Tamworth's main shopping centre. Named Middle Entry, and built back in the 1970s, this is where people come every day to get their groceries. But for many centuries before the covered shopping arcade, this was the site of an ancient open-air market, once upon a time busy with stalls and surrounded by historic shops and taverns. But for many centuries, it wasn't simply one market that was held in Tamworth, but rather two entirely separate ones. As we know, Tamworth was split right down the middle between the counties of Staffordshire and Warwickshire until 1889. And as we make our way out of Middle Entry, we encounter the place where that dividing line once ran. Modern refurbishment works to our right are ongoing along the route of Church Street, and it was this row which historically marked the boundary between Staffordshire and Warwickshire, and hence was the place where two separate markets would have butted heads. The Warwickshire market was generally held around the town hall and along Market Street, whereas the Staffordshire market was held here, in the shadow of Tamworth's majestic parish church, St Editha's. The pride of Staffordshire for more than a millennium, St Editha's Church is today the largest parish church in the whole county, the current building dating from the mid-14th century, when it, along with the rest of the town, was rebuilt after a devastating fire. But this is actually the fourth church to stand on the site. The first is thought to have been built all the way back in the 8th century, around the same time as the original Anglo-Saxon palace, although the original church here was sadly destroyed by Danish attacks. Today, Tamworth's nearly 700-year-old church stands proudly in the heart of town, overlooking this prominent war memorial, which is dedicated to the local men who lost their lives fighting in the First and Second World Wars. The memorial stands at the northern end of St Editha's Square, the open space in front of the church, historically a venue for Staffordshire markets and other civic events. And just beside it here is another eye-catching monument, a statue of a World War I soldier made of flowers, which bloom with colour during the spring and summer months. But as we make our way into the churchyard, bathed in golden leaves, it's clear that we're here in the autumn. But even with chillier weather and cloudy skies overhead, there's more than enough history in this corner of town to keep enchanting us as we continue our walk. As we mentioned, St Editha's here is the largest parish church that you'll find in Staffordshire today, an indication, if anything, of Tamworth's immense significance through time. The original 8th century church, though lost to Danish attacks, was replaced by a newer church in the late 10th century, and it was founded by King Edgar of England. The young king, who ruled during a period of fewer Viking incursions in the region, is thought to have founded this church and dedicated it to a woman who may also have been his aunt, Editha, a saintly abbess closely associated with this part of the country. While that building may be a distant memory today, the name lives on in the 21st century, the mighty St Editha's Church an unmissable landmark in the heart of Tamworth. However, it's now time for us to make our way out of St Editha's churchyard, and as we turn around, we're greeted by a charming little lane, which is simply named Little Church Lane. This quaint row of shops, mostly dating from the 19th century, is a good example of the kind of historic lanes that you would have found all over central Tamworth before redevelopment in the mid-20th century. Indeed, Middle Entry, before the shopping centre, wouldn't have looked entirely unlike Little Church Lane here. But Little Church Lane, a wonderful view back to the past, leads out from the churchyard towards a wide street known as Gungate, which also once marked the route of the old county border, and which plays host to some historic almshouses. The buildings just in front of us here, the very almshouses that were founded in 1678 by Thomas Guy, the benefactor of the town hall. As we know, after years of working in the town, Guy rejected the people of Tamworth when he was voted out as MP. And as well as threatening to demolish the town hall, he also banned locals from using the almshouses here on Gungate. And incredibly, that rule is still in place to this very day. Opposite the almshouses, meanwhile, is an 18th century building that began life as a shop, and now serves as one of the many pubs that you'll find along this street. With a fetching castle mosaic out front, Gungate here is one of Tamworth's most historic streets, and its name is an excellent example. Notably, Gungate bears the suffix gate, a term which actually derives from the Old Norse language spoken by the Danes. As we pass by the Sir Robert Peel pub, the gate in Gungate simply means street, but it's a clear indication of the influence that Danish culture would have had on this town more than 1,000 years ago. Indeed, while Tamworth mostly remained an Anglo-Saxon stronghold, the town lay on the frontier with the Danelaw, the part of England under Norse rule, and as such the people here would have interacted directly with Scandinavian peoples for many years. It all plays into the fascinating and varied history that makes up the Tamworth that we know today, and a few market stalls along Gungate here on this chilly autumn afternoon show that centuries-old traditions are still very much alive in this fascinating Staffordshire town. Just up ahead though, we can see a crossroads, an important one both in a local and a much wider sense. It was here that the county border turned a corner. Further down the street ahead was Warwickshire, while this was Staffordshire. And close to this very site there once stood an old stone cross, an important landmark of the late 13th century, which marked the site of the main marketplace for the Staffordshire side of town. That's why the pub here is known as the Old Stone Cross, and it stands just next door to a grand building that's more than 300 years old. Dating from 1709, this cream-coloured edifice was originally built as a local theatre, a popular playhouse looking out over a crossroads busy with history. Just across the street, for instance, there stands the Penny Black, a pub so named because it was once the local post office, where people began sending letters using the Penny Black, the name for the world's very first sticky postage stamp, invented back in 1840. But the most notable building on these crossroads is surely this, the old Tamworth Co-op building, for many decades the venue of a department store built to provide the people of this town with quality products at fair prices. Since 2021, the building has been closed, expected to be renovated as facilities for Tamworth College. But the co-op which historically occupied it has a history dating all the way back to 1886, when a local reverend, William McGregor, sought to hit back against wealthy local traders who were charging over the odds for everyday essentials. McGregor, along with a band of locals, followed in the footsteps of a number of other cooperative societies established around the country in the 19th century. And the Tamworth Co-op is still running today. A dozen or so shops around the town here are members of the society, committed to fair pricing and engagement with the local community. As we've been discussing the history of Tamworth's Co-op though, we've made our way back over the old county border, into what was once Warwickshire. Now of course there were never physical barricades erected through the middle of Tamworth to separate the two counties. But as we've learned from the history of the town's two markets, the separation did affect people on a day-to-day basis. to the point that, as the population grew ever bigger, the split became too much of an inconvenience. So, in 1889, the town was wholly absorbed into Staffordshire. But why did it fall that way? Why was Tamworth not made into a fully Warwickshire town? Well, as we begin making our way along George Street here, the desire to clean up county borders in the late Victorian era wasn't just an issue affecting Tamworth. As towns and cities across the country had grown suddenly in size during the Industrial Revolution, the historic county borders, in place since the Middle Ages, no longer effectively represented how and where people were actually living. So, to solve the problem, the government decided to place any urban area split between more than one county into just one, the county which contained the greater proportion of the local population. At the time in Tamworth, 2,587 people lived on the Staffordshire side of town, while on the Warwickshire side here, there were just 2,032. It was close, but simple maths meant that Tamworth was destined to become a part of Staffordshire, and the border was moved about 2 miles to the southeast, now marking the outer boundary of the modern urban area. Walking the town streets today, there's little visible evidence of the historic county split, but it's a fascinating part of Tamworth's history, and indeed the reason that the Warwickshire side of town had to hold their markets here, just a minute's walk from the Staffordshire marketplace. Just here, George Street has become Market Street once again, where you'll find the modern Ankerside shopping centre, the old Midland Bank building here, built back in 1920, and indeed the Town Hall to our right, which we saw earlier. Having survived threats of demolition from an embittered Thomas Guy, the Town Hall came to be known as the venue for Tamworth's butter markets, the place where dairy produce was sold, under the shelter of the council chambers overhead. As we know, the history of market trading in this part of town can be traced all the way back to the Anglo-Saxon era, when the palace was first founded. But this begs the question, why did the Mercians decide to establish a major seat of power here? And what was it that helped Tamworth to remain such a significant place in the following centuries? Well, we can learn a bit about this from Tamworth's name. Originating from Old English, Tamworth literally refers to an enclosure, or a settlement, beside the River Tame. Now, the Tame is one of the main rivers of the West Midlands, flowing for nearly 60 miles through the cities of Wolverhampton and Birmingham, on its way to joining the much larger River Trent. And we're now going to make our way towards the Tame as it flows through Tamworth here, because the river played a big part in why this place was chosen for such a significant settlement. With the river feeding fertile agricultural lands along its route, early Anglo-Saxon settlers came to this part of Britain in great numbers after the end of the Roman era, and through generations of successful harvests, they were able to develop a fairly large and wealthy town here beside the Tame. But it was the building of the castle which really changed Tamworth's fortunes in the long run. And just here we find a major local institution named after just that. The elegant Castle Hotel here, boasting at least 200 years of history, dating back to at least the early 19th century. It's a majestic lodging that dominates the route of a street known as Holloway, which stretches down from the town centre towards the River Tame. Now, Holloway is one of the oldest streets in Tamworth. In fact, it likely began life thousands of years ago as a prehistoric trackway, with a ford across the Tame, and it developed in the Middle Ages as one of the main approaches into Tamworth from the southwest. Today, the street is particularly distinctive because it runs parallel with this raised terrace of houses, which is known separately as Ladybank. And for much of history, Ladybank and Holloway, though just inches apart, were once again victims of Tamworth's historic split between counties. The border used to run straight down this street, the side of the road that we're on here having always been part of Staffordshire, but the buildings of Tamworth Castle across the street historically part of Warwickshire. At the time of early Anglo-Saxon settlement, however, these counties hadn't even come into existence. Indeed, when the 8th century palace was built here at Tamworth, England was split between many different kingdoms, Mercia being one of the largest of all. The castle here was commissioned by King Offa of Mercia, a powerful ruler who expanded his territories greatly and consolidated his control of the Midlands here. In fact, his palace here at Tamworth, in the heartlands of his kingdom, was said to have been a wonder of the age, resplendent with elegant furnishings and grand on a scale like few others. The Norman castle that we see before us today is a little simpler in style, but it, like the palace before it, benefited greatly from its surroundings. Indeed, it's likely that King Offa chose to build his fortress here because of the local geography. The small river Anker providing a natural defence for the palace from enemy forces, and its confluence with the much larger river Tame, a point of real strategic value, the latter being one of the busiest and most important waterways in the region. By building his palace overlooking the river, along which trade flowed deep inland from the coasts, Offa would have been able to wield considerable power over the goings-on in the heart of his kingdom, and he would have also controlled the important ford across the Tame, used by people travelling between the north and southwest of Britain. Today we're able to cross the river using a modern bridge, and gaze out across the point where the waters of the river Anker on the right and the river Tame on the left briefly meet. The Anker comes to an end as it flows into the Tame just under a mile further downstream. But as we know, both rivers have long played an important role in Tamworth's history, and still do so as they flow right through the heart of the town. However, as we take in a view of Tamworth's riverside scenery and gaze back towards the castle, it's here above the rivers Tame and Anker that our walk around this endlessly riveting town has sadly reached its end. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're looking forward to making your own visit to Tamworth sometime soon.